everyone, I'm Mithy, and today I'm going to be explaining how to write an argumentative essay. Let's first take a look at the main components of any type of essay. There will always be an introduction, a few body paragraphs, and a conclusion at the end. Just to let you know, I will be elaborating on each section using the topic of banning animal testing. First, let's go over the introduction. This is the very beginning of any essay, where you hook your readers in and allow the argument to unfold later on. The first two sentences of the introduction is called the hook. There are 4 types of hooks that are used most frequently. The first type of hook is called a question hook. In the question hook, you have to make sure that the sentence can't be answered with just a simple yes or no. A bad example of this would be, "Do you like rabbits?" This is not a good example because it can be answered with a yes or a no. Yes, I do like rabbits, or no, I don't like rabbits. A better example would be, "What makes rabbits such cute and adorable creatures?" This question would cause the reader to actually think about their answer. Making your reader think about your question makes them more invested into your entire essay. That's why there's this rule of making sure that the sentence can't be answered with a simple yes or no. I would also recommend having a second sentence to elaborate on the question. In response to my previous hook that I used as an example, I would write, "Some may say it's their delicate soft paws or large trusting eyes, but others may think their silly and curious personalities are what makes them fun to take care of." Let's move on to the quote hook. In the quote hook, you quote someone else's words and write a second sentence that explains what the quote means in your context. For example, Rhonda Stagg once said, "I wish that medical researchers who experiment on animals would experiment on humans to try to find a cure for their insensitivity to the suffering of animals." Advocating for the end of animal testing, Stagg emphasizes the insensitivity of animal testers who ignore the suffering of animals. Now, let's move on to the statistic hook. In the statistic hook, you have to make sure that the source for the statistic is credible, and you must cite it in the works cited section at the very end. For example, according to PETA, rabbits are frequently used in animal experiments because they are mild-tempered and easy to handle, confine, and breed. More than 161,000 of them are used in U.S. laboratories every year. For this hook, I would also recommend having a second sentence. As an example, "This reliance on animals for experiments shows the urgency of needing to seek alternative testing methods to prioritize animal welfare while still advancing scientific research." This helps elaborate on the statistic and helps the reader understand why the statistic is important. And last but not least, the anecdote hook. An anecdote is a story that compels to the reader's emotions, and I would also recommend having a second sentence for this hook. For example, I wrote, "As a child, I was enamored with the natural world, spending hours observing creatures in their habitats, marveling at their uniqueness and grace. However, as I grew older, I became increasingly aware of a darker reality hidden behind closed laboratory doors." This is a story that compels to the reader's emotions because it describes a child who was in love with the natural world, but grew up to discover the horror of animal testing. Now that we have our hook written, let's move on to the background and thesis. The background and thesis are 2 separate sentences. The background comes after the hook. In the background, you have to provide context to the issue. For example, the issue of animal testing has remained a subject of ethical debate, posing significant questions about the moral implications of using living beings for experimentation purposes. Then, after you provided context to the issue, you can finally state the thesis, which is the last sentence of your introduction. In the thesis statement, you have to clearly state your position on the topic. For example, animal testing must be banned because there are more moral alternatives, respect for animal rights, and ethical concerns. As you can see, the thesis must also include your 3 reasons, which will be the topic sentence for your 3 body paragraphs in the middle. Now that we mentioned body paragraphs, let's take a look at them. Body paragraphs are the main arguments of your essay. They provide compelling reasons that back up your thesis. Now, I will be talking about the overall structure of body paragraphs. The first sentence is called the topic sentence, which is a single point from your thesis that the paragraph will be revolving around. The second sentence is called the background sentence, which is where you give more context to the topic of the paragraph and elaborate on the topic sentence. Then, you can write the third sentence, which is the first piece of evidence. The evidence must be quoted from a reliable source using a dialogue tag that includes the genre, title, and author. After your first piece of evidence, you can then write your first piece of commentary. Commentary is 2 sentences. Since the first sentence needs to explain what your evidence means, I like to use the phrase, "this means." And since your second sentence needs to explain why your evidence is important, I like to use the phrase, "this is important because," to start off the sentence. Now that you're done with your commentary, you can move on to your second piece of evidence, which is another quote from a reliable source using a dialogue tag, preferably one that relates to the commentary you wrote above. The commentary for this piece of evidence is generally the same. It must explain what your evidence means and explain why it is important. However, to refrain from the repetition of "this means" and "this is important because," I would like to switch it up a bit and say, "this shows" and "this is crucial because" instead. You can search for synonyms in order to make your writing less boring and repetitive. Now, at the very end of your body paragraph, you have to write your conclusion sentence, which is basically a summary where you rewrite the topic sentence and wrap up the first paragraph. Since there are usually only 3 body paragraphs, there must be 3 strategies, which we call the modes of persuasion. In the first paragraph, you can use logos, which is logical appeal. This is where you present facts, evidence, and logical reasoning in order to make your first argument really logically based. You must provide facts, evidence, and logical reasoning in all of your paragraphs. However, in the first paragraph, this must be more logic and focused on rationality. For the second paragraph, you can use ethos, which is ethical appeal. This is where you establish your credibility by adding authoritative sources and include questions on ethics and morality. For the third paragraph, you can use pathos, which is emotional appeal, where you appeal to the reader's emotions for further persuasion. In the third paragraph, you can also use a counterargument to back up your side even more. When using a counterargument, respectfully acknowledge a point that differs from your claim and refute the stance using words like although or however. You want to show the reader why your position is more correct than the opposing idea. Having a strong awareness of how to utilize logos, ethos, and pathos to be as convincing as possible to your audience will help you as you write argumentative essays. Now, we're finally at the conclusion. The conclusion is the ending of any essay, where you wrap up your arguments and restate your key points. The conclusion is very simple, and you just have to restate and create an impactful ending. First, you have to restate your topic. For example, in conclusion, the debate over animal testing involves ethical, scientific, and moral considerations. Second, you have to restate your thesis and points. For example, since there are more moral alternatives, respect for animal rights, and ethical concerns, animal testing must be banned. Third, you can explain why your side is more important in general. For example, Implementing such bans would not only address the moral concerns about animal welfare, but also drive the exploration and adoption of more humane and scientifically reliable research methods. Lastly, conclude your thoughts and end on a positive and inspirational note. For example, ultimately, it's imperative to forge a path forward that reconciles scientific innovation with ethical responsibility, ensuring progress without compromising compassion for all living beings. And there you go. It's really just that simple. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me at this email address. Please support by liking and subscribing. Goodbye!